On September 8, 2023, NASA admitted that it could not finance the Artemis program to land people on the moon. An agency representative said that the costs were too high. There is physically no money and a lot of work remains to be done to structure expenses. Elon Musk's SpaceX has again taken the lead in the moon race, and frankly, in the world of astronautics, no one was shocked by NASA's announcement. The project alone, the construction of exactly one rocket, the SLS, which has already flown to the moon with the Artemis 1 mission, cost $12 billion. And to work on the program until 2027, NASA needs another $11 billion. For comparison, Elon Musk's Falcon 9 was designed for $390 million. And all 260 launches of the family of rockets from July 2010 to the present moment cost a total of $17.42 billion, excluding inflation. Even if the final number is about $25 billion, 5,000 Starlink satellites were launched into orbit for this money. 42 people have been sent into space, and God knows how much military and civilian equipment. But NASA took a soft toy to the moon for the same money and is only planning a manned flyby of the satellite. In general, the situation with cuts is no better, and of course, lunar conspiracy theorists came out from all corners to support this statement. Supposedly no one has been to the moon, NASA is just looking for an excuse to merge so as not to embarrass itself, and stuff like that. In the next couple of minutes, we invite you to plunge into the past and pay tribute to the hard workers who, despite everything, visited the moon. There are many interesting facts associated with the Apollo mission, and even secrets that few people know about. We will get to know them. But first, let's look at the facts. It is widely believed that the Americans decided to fly to the moon in 1957, after the launch of the world's first artificial Earth satellite. The success from the USSR allegedly stunned the Americans so much that they decided to aim for the moon to definitely show everyone who's boss. For the sake of all humanity, Apollo 13 and even some documentaries are often guilty of this artistic exaggeration. Allegedly, the US population was shocked that the USSR received a military trump card that was decisive in the Cold War. The reality, as always, is more modest. Firstly, the space race had already been going on for a long time by that time, and the United States launched its satellite just a couple of months after the Soviets. Secondly, a CIA report to President Eisenhower from 1957, transcribed in 2017, clearly states that the military threat from the USSR's space successes was then assessed as zero. The Apollo program initially had nothing to do with the moon at all. It was created in the early 60s as a logical continuation of the Mercury program. One astronaut could fly into orbit there. As part of the Apollo mission, they planned to create a ship for three. The moon was mentioned in the project only hypothetically, because almost any device could be launched to the moon or Mars with enough rocket power. The modern meaning of the word was breathed into the Apollo program by Robert Kennedy in May 1961, in his legendary speech. What happened next you probably know. From July 20, 1969 to December 7, 1972, 6 successful landings on the moon were made. 12 people walked along its surface. The total cost of the program in modern money is $300 billion. At this point, even the gigantic waste of modern NASA looks like flowers. But we came here for interesting things. And the first fun fact is that the first man on the moon was Neil Armstrong. It was not only courage that did it, but also cowardice. On May 6, 1968, during a training flight to the moon, Neil's module lost control. Armstrong ejected and survived a painful parachute landing from a height of 9 meters, while the ship exploded under his feet. If Neil had ejected even a couple of seconds later, he probably would have died. In general, the difference from the movies is that safety instructions in the real world are paramount. True, he was savvy, as is required of astronauts in Hollywood. After landing on the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin accidentally touched the engine start switch with their backpack. It is traditionally believed that Aldrin broke it, but there is an opinion that in this way journalists simply took away the negativity from the first man on the moon, Armstrong. In general, the guys could not turn on the engine to take off from the moon. Until the same Aldrin, being an engineer by profession, came up with the greatest engineering thing possible. He simply closed the contact using the handle and started the ship. It's also funny that Bass was supposed to be the first man on the moon. The fact is that, according to the current rules at that time, extravehicular activities in space were primarily carried out by the pilot, but not by the commander. It seems to him that this is not according to his status. This is how all the Gemini missions flew, and this is exactly how Apollo planned to fly. However, Armstrong's commander was the first to set foot on the moon, officially due to the fact that the design of the lunar module was not very convenient for the first pilot to go out, since he would have to climb over the commander. Unofficially, there are still rumors that Armstrong used his position to push through the decision and write himself into history. One way or another, Buzz Aldrin never really complained about this. And together with Neil he returned more than 20 kilograms of lunar soil to Earth. In total, 6 manned missions brought back 382 kilograms. Having received it, earthly scientists performed one of the most cunning and altruistic acts. Demonstrating that space exploration is an idea without time or political boundaries. Half of the Apollo mission soil was vacuum sealed and placed in a maximum security warehouse with exactly one instruction: open in 50 years and distribute to the whole world. This was done so that the descendants of scientists, having more advanced equipment, could open reserves and study the soil better. And guess what? This actually happened. Exactly 50 years after Armstrong in 2019, one of the containers was opened and began to be studied. Progress has really stepped forward and there have been all sorts of discoveries. In that same soil, the Apollo missions managed to grow plants, found amino acids, water, and a bunch of other interesting things. They also left part of the soil for the future, so that later it could be studied even better. After all, it turned out that scientists in 1969 understood perfectly well that it was far from a fact that after the completion of the Apollo mission someone would find the same amount of money to fly to the moon. And this is not a brilliant insight, but another lunar myth. Thanks to Hollywood, we are all somehow accustomed to thinking that the flight to the moon united American society. Democrats, Republicans, left, right, and Greens supposedly came together and put aside their differences. The reality is sadder here too. NASA historian Bill Barry recently collected dozens of public opinion polls about the Apollo program in the United States. Polls were conducted in the 60s and drum roll, more than 50% of people voted for the need for a high-rise building on the moon in only one. The one that took place a week after Neil Armstrong's walk. Within 2 weeks, the majority were again against studying the moon, as they had been all 10 years before. Bill Barry adds that the Apollo program has never been popular among the general public. We think you will draw parallels with modern times yourself. We will only note that the missions were not an easy ride. You've all probably heard about the Apollo 1 tragedy. On February 21, 1967, the first manned launch was to take place in preparation for a flight to the moon. Edward White, Virgil Grissom, and Roger Chaffee were caught in a terrible fire on January 27, 1967 during a ground-based experiment. What exactly went wrong, no one could explain, because there was nothing left of the astronauts. The investigation only showed that in an oxygen atmosphere, even friction or tufts on clothing can cause a fire, which, due to the pressure difference, cannot be eliminated quickly, and even the astronauts cannot be saved. We learned our lesson, and for the next 6 years we did not lose a single crew. And 30 years later, humanity learned another lesson. The USSR declassified information that on March 23, 1961, just 3 weeks before the historic launch of Yuri Gagarin, Soviet cosmonaut Valentin Bondarenko died in similar circumstances. He spent 9 days in the Serta Chamber, undergoing loneliness tests. and he accidentally threw the alcohol cotton not into the trash, but onto the switched-on electric stove. Unlike the Apollo astronauts, Valentin was pulled out of the chamber still alive. But unfortunately, he only managed to say that he himself was to blame for the tragedy and asked not to punish anyone. They did so and solved the fire hazard problem 6 years before NASA encountered it. If the data about the incident had not been classified or at least secretly shared with NASA, the Apollo program engineers would have definitely made the necessary adjustments. This, by the way, has been done since then, publicly or secretly. So the sacrifices of Soviet and American cosmonauts were not in vain. By the way, they are often reproached by space programs, declaring that all these toys bring only death and zero benefit for science. Flights to the moon were supposedly purely political and just a beautiful gesture, which was not followed by any discoveries. This is perhaps the most offensive and senseless myth. Yes, the stones brought from the moon did not give us a new theory of relativity. But even if you don't count Velcro clothing, water purification systems, vacuum cleaners, and other technologies that were born during the lunar race, the Apollo mission gave a lot to science. It was by studying lunar thunder that scientists first realized that the moon and the Earth consist of plus or minus the same substance. And they put forward the theory of a collision with the planet Theia, the lunar one that broke away from us. Right now, this discovery has not yet said its last word. But sooner or later it is possible to conduct full-fledged simulations. Understand what happened and how, and answer the main question, where the hell did life come from on Earth and how to reproduce it? The power of computers and neural networks is growing every year. Someday we will be able to close this theory, conduct a simulation and be able to create the conditions for the emergence of life from scratch. And all this thanks to the supposedly useless Apollo missions. See you again, friends.